Welcome everyone. Thanks, Lara. Thanks, Dad, for joining us for yet another year to get a recap of the World Happiness Report. And what's great about these conversations is there's sort of two elements. One is just having two of the main people behind the whole World Happiness Report giving us their uncensored responses to any questions we might have about it, and it's really amazing to see how it's evolved over the years. And then the other is, more specifically, given Thrive Health, we chose the name Thrive to really push the idea that we see health as more than just a mental and physical health, but really actual well-being as well. So before we jump in, I'm gonna do the land acknowledgement. I'm here on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we have people calling in from around the country from a number of other territories as well. We're going to have a little bit of, from a logistical perspective, you'll be able to ask questions and make comments in a number of ways. We're going to have three main channels. One, you can just click to put your hand up, and then I can come to you that way. Two, you can put your questions into the Q&A tab in Zoom. And three, Kelsey's going to put up a Menti number here. There it is. So we'll leave that up for just a moment, and you can go to menti.com and enter that code, or you can just scan it. And so while that's up, I'll just get back to a little bit of the intros about both my dad John and Lara really understand and have helped us in putting together what we're trying to do at Thrive to allow for the fact that people are more resilient through healthcare journeys when they're happier. Also, the health system can't afford to have paid employees doing everything related to people's health. And as Lara's research has shown, around pro-social behaviors, people get real benefits from doing good things to others. And our assumption is that applies in the healthcare system as well. So, and it'd be great to see how that fits with this year. And then also, so my dad John was one of the founders of the World Happiness Report and has spent the last 25 years in this space after a long career in all sorts of other areas of macroeconomics. And Dad, you had an interesting statistic that you've had more citations to your publications that you produced after the age of 65 than before, and given that's only 22 years since 65, I think that's kind of neat and a good inspiration to all of us for what we can do in our so-called retirement. So I want to pass it over to the two of you to take us through an overview of the World Happiness Report as a whole, and then we'll get into the Q&A. And I encourage everybody as we're going, just do put through your questions as they strike you, and we'll curate a bit of a discussion afterwards. So Kelsey, is that good? Are we good to go for the presentation?
Yep, we can see everything.
Great. Thank you so much. Over to the main event.
Great. So thanks everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I can't see everyone now that I've started sharing slides, but I'm just gonna hopefully get like a nod or a verbal confirmation from John that our last plan is still the plan, which is that I think I'm gonna give a brief presentation primarily on chapter 2 of the report, but as you'll see in a kind of like a sampler platter, if you will, of the whole report. And then John can kind of ad lib, cut me off wherever you like, and add an addition, or we can kind of chat and elaborate after. So John, I can't see you yet, but please do cut me off if that, okay, I saw the thumbs up. Thank you. So I will begin. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today with John and David and Kelsey and the whole Thrive team to kind of share our thoughts on this year's, a summary of this year's World Happiness Report, which is on a topic near and dear to my heart, which is caring and sharing. But before I start, I thought it would be helpful to mention a few important points. As you've probably noticed, this is, or you might be familiar, the World Happiness Report is kind of a large undertaking and enterprise. And so this year, I think, is no less, and in fact might actually be more in its rich and varied composure, because this year, I think, is one of the largest editions released to date. It has 8 chapters, and it's the first one where we truly had an open call. And so, like I said, I'll be focusing primarily on chapter 2 and giving a brief snapshot into the other chapters, but there is so much richness to explore. So I encourage you to head over to the World Happiness Report landing page for the full report. And there are also some really well-produced videos where you can hear from the chapter authors themselves, kind of giving the highlights. And yes, just wanted to give a shout out to all the authors who contributed to this. It's a product of many, many talented folks' hard work, and who have perhaps very appropriately devoted so much of their time and expertise to preparing this year. So with that being said, I thought it would be helpful I'm going to focus my time primarily on chapter 2, and I suspect this is a unique crowd who may have quite a bit of familiarity with the World Happiness Report already. But in case you don't, I thought it might be helpful to just orient people to let you know that chapter 2 of the World Happiness Report is usually the one that attracts a lot of attention and hooks people in. And that is the chapter where John and Heifeng calculate the average life satisfaction ratings across nations to help people see kind of from 1 all the way to around 140 or so how countries rank in their average happiness. And I thought it would be helpful just to ground the conversation in what that is based upon. And that is derived from simply an average of people's response to this measure, which is the Cantrell ladder. That sounds a little something like this. I've pulled this from online, and I suspect this is the version that Gallup uses, but the words might vary slightly, but it's the same basic idea. People are shown an image of a ladder like so on the right that has 11 rungs from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. And they're asked to imagine this ladder as a way of picturing their life, with the top rung, number 10, being the best possible life for themselves, and the bottom rung at 0 being the worst possible life for you. And then they're asked to report with a simple numerical answer where they feel they personally stand right now. And with responses to this question from around 1,000 people per country per year, John and Heifeng compute the average rating within each nation, and they usually take a 3-year average to get a more precise estimate of these life satisfaction or happiness ratings within a country. And once that's done, I apologize if this is a little fuzzy. The most accurate or clearest version of this will be online, but this is just a snapshot of figure 2.1, which is where you can see the rankings of countries all the way from number 1 with a long list down to 147. And I'll just point out a couple things. The first is that Finland is once again in the top spot for its 8th year in a row. There are a number of other Scandinavian countries that are up nearby, for instance, with Denmark and Iceland in 2nd and 3rd place, respectively. And while there are many similar names remaining in some top spots, there are also kind of a few new higher ranking countries. So in particular, Costa Rica is in 6th place this year, and Mexico is in 10th. And when making sense of this image, it might be helpful to just orient you to the fact that the length of this line represents the average life satisfaction rating reported within that country over the 3-year period. So from around 3,000 people, give or take, on that 0 to 10 Cantrell ladder that we just discussed a moment ago. And so Finland up here at the top has an average ranking of around 7.7, and other countries have lower average life satisfactions as you go all the way down. And then the colorful sections of each bar represent the extent to which 6 key variables contribute to explaining life evaluations. So these variables, don't worry if you can't make out the numbers clearly, but just for understanding, there's the log GDP per capita, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom, generosity, and corruption. And so the happiness rankings are not an index, a composite of these, but rather these factors help us kind of explain the variations in country rankings across the globe. So that might be hopefully a helpful way to understand the rankings that draw people in to the report and to chapter 2 in particular. But because this year's theme was on caring and sharing, and as you just heard me say, donations are one of the key predictors in life evaluations around the globe, we took a close look, a deep dive into some global trends of benevolence. What we're kind of using is another helpful term for pro-social behavior or the kind and caring deeds we do for one another. And for one of our first looks into this question, we used data from the Gallup World Poll, which is kind of a key source of our data for the World Happiness Report. Unfortunately, the Gallup World Poll tracks a number of three kind of key measures of benevolence. So one is donations. Another one is whether people have reported volunteering in the past month and whether people have helped a stranger in the past month. And this image, I think, captures a number of interesting findings. The first, I think you can see hopefully in this image, is that this pink line is the highest of those three independent forms of benevolence. So you can see roughly, give or take a few percentage points, that around 50% of people have reported helping a stranger within the past month or so over the past 20-year period. And so hovering around 50% of the population surveyed in these polls and that are, adjusted to give population weighted means is showing that people are helping others. Below that, around the 25 to 30% line is 30% marker are people giving donations. And then the lowest of benevolence around here is volunteering. But that's still hovering at around 20%. And so it's nice to see, relatively speaking, how these three forms of benevolence might stack up against one another. Over time, this has remained a pretty consistent pattern. But the other thing to draw your attention to is how these trends in benevolence, the three forms, have changed over time. So looking at around a 20-year period, you can see that benevolence on these three markers has gone up. I should mention that this A line is around the 2008 economic recession, and here this line B is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so over time, these estimates have increased, particularly so, and in contrast to many people's perhaps pessimistic perceptions, these rates of helping behavior really increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. And although the trend lines have started to take a dip downwards, all of these markers of pro-social behavior are still 10% or more higher than where they were before pre-COVID levels. Now, I think it's nice to see an increase in prosociality over time, and I think it's promising for many reasons, including the fact that a growing body of research has shown that helping other people is both associated with and leads to higher levels of happiness for the helper. Some colleagues and I were invited to write a chapter about this very topic back in 2019 for the World Happiness Report. And so we tried to summarize the state of the evidence there. And in doing so, I think we pointed towards the strengths that were emerging in the data, as well as some inconsistencies. And so here in this year's report, we also tried to ask not just if helping others seems to lead to higher levels of happiness, which by and large it seems to, but in particular, when this is most likely. And so one part of chapter 2 that I was excited to help with was written with Sarah Conrath, in which we tried to summarize the literature to date by pulling together a lot of information suggesting that giving seems to be the most rewarding for helpers, when it embodies one or more of these three C's. So the first is caring connections, the second is a sense of choice, and the third is a sense of clear impact. So let me tell you a little bit more about what each of those reflect. Oh, hopefully my slide, there we go. So on the idea of this caring connections, the literature suggests that people tend to give the most to people who are nearby. Part of that is just due to proximity, and people tend to feel happiest when they're able to give in socially connected ways. And in fact, if you think about it, probably you've experienced this in your life as well. In caring communities, sometimes even this giver and recipient role tends to have a very blurred line, because people are giving and supporting and receiving help so frequently that it's not just one person playing one of these roles, but that we're often situated in both. But that doesn't mean we don't help beyond our close social circles. In fact, as you saw in the graph just moments ago, around 50% of the population are report helping strangers. And that seems to help people feel good as well. And in fact, this is especially likely when people feel that when people are motivated by caring personality traits, forms of empathy, and various caring motives. And when those are the inspiration behind helping others, we're especially likely to feel good about giving. In addition to these caring connections, I also mentioned that choice seems to be one thing that kind of unlocks these emotional rewards of giving. And so when people feel like their benevolent actions are freely chosen, they are more likely to feel good about giving. So sometimes, various charities and whatnot might um, provide more of an opportunity or a sense of choice, and that leads people to express the values and the type of person they are, and those are especially likely to be rewarding scenarios. And finally, giving seems to bring about the greatest emotional benefits when people feel or can see how their kind acts have had a positive impact on another. So sometimes that might come from giving directly to another person where you can see the benefits on that recipient's face, or when you give blood, you can hear about when it's been donated to another person. And by and large, when we can foster these sense of connections, and people see a greater sense of their impact, the greater they will feel. And this might help explain why some forms of various activism where people are really exerting a lot of effort to make a big change, but the change might not be manifesting, can be one situation in which people might expend a lot of energy trying to improve things, but not not derive as much happiness from it. And it might be because some of that impact information is missing. So helping others can promote our own happiness, but beyond our own acts of kindness, it turns out that whether we view others as kind and helpful is also a big important predictor of our happiness. And this is another aspect of chapter 2, led by John and his expertise in many things, including these wallet drop experiments or wallet drop studies, a topic that I think is near and dear to John's heart, as I know he's been a beneficiary of a kind stranger going out of their way to return some of his lost possessions, and I'd wager a guess that he's probably gone out of his way to return a few wallets himself. So what do these wallet drop studies involve? Well, there are kind of two key forms of data. One is that some studies collect information on how likely people are to actually return a lost wallet to a stranger. Now, this might sound hard to tap, but researchers have gone out and literally dropped wallets, anywhere from dozens to hundreds of them with money and ID inside in various cities around the world to see how many were returned. And this provides, these response rate provide an objective measure of kindness, if you will. To what extent are people willing to go out of their way to stop their day to take some time to help what might be a complete stranger in need? The other form of information that we can collect from these wallet drop studies is how likely people are to anticipate or predict someone to return a lost wallet. So for instance, in some studies, people are asked if 10 wallets are dropped in your city or nearby with this, with ID and money inside, how likely or how many wallets are there would be returned. And people's estimates or predictions give us some insight into their perceptions of other people's kindness. So what do these data tell us? Well, in study after study, the data show that people are overly pessimistic about the kindness of others. So a lot of global evidence suggests that wallet return rates are far higher than people expect. So the global evidence on perceived and actual return rates for lost wallets suggests that people are too pessimistic about the kindness of people in their communities because wallet rates are nearly twice as high as people expect. So here are some figures for you to see. I think the precise numbers, tell a pretty consistent story. But I think what's interesting is that across these kind of five sites, if you will, actual wallet return rates varied somewhere in the ballpark from around 50 to 80%. But that's the true wallet return behavior. But people's estimates never surpassed 40%. So in roughly, I guess one way to put it is that expectations were about half of that what actually occurred. I think suggesting that we drastically underestimate the kindness of our neighbors by about a half. And it turns out that that matters. And it matters quite a bit for our happiness. How? Well, when we believe that other people are willing to help us, say for instance by returning a lost wallet, this is a strong and positive predictor of life evaluations. So this figure shown here from chapter 2 shows how various factors, both good and bad, independently predict life evaluations. And I think as you can see, for instance, currently being unemployed it's a strong negative predictor of someone's life satisfaction, as is believing that one could be harmed by mental health issues or violent crime. So all of these are on the negative side in terms of predicting people's life evaluations. And on the positive side, we see that a doubling of one's income is positively associated with higher levels of life evaluations, as is engaging in kind and benevolent acts. But the strongest predictor shown here in this graph is believing that a wallet is likely to be returned. And so seeing others as kind and willing to help has this strong predictive value on our life evaluations. Similarly, seeing other people as fair and helpful might minimize the harmful or detrimental impacts of various life challenges. So for instance, being unemployed, separated, divorced, or widowed, discriminated against, and having low levels of health, all of these predict lower levels of life satisfaction. But these negative impacts are sizably weaker, and you could think about this as perhaps less harmful for those who see others as fair and helpful as compared to those who don't. And so these pink bars indicate people who see others as fair and helpful. The darker purple bars suggest these are folks who don't see other people as fair and helpful. And as you can see, the associations between all of these unfortunate life challenges is quite a bit smaller for those in the pink bars. And finally, believing that most other people are fair and helpful is a strong predictor of life satisfaction, akin to, but also stronger than recognized other positive predictors, such as attending social meetings, trusting the police, and trusting other people. And so it's not just about the basic sense of trust, perhaps, but above and beyond that, seeing other people as fair and helpful might have these positive consequences for our well-being. And perhaps this helps to explain or help to address one of the common questions about why the Nordic countries are topping these global happiness rankings year after year. Nordic countries are not only places where wallets are less likely to be returned, are more likely, to be returned, but are also places where people believe that lost wallets are likely to be returned. And as such, it seems that both helping one another and also recognizing that other people are willing to step in and help you when needed is really consequential for our happiness. And so here is just one lovely image that one of our co-authors, Max, prepared to show that in the Nordic countries, approximately 80% of wallets are being returned, and people do have, they underestimate the helpfulness of their neighbors, but they're estimating around 40% when the true wallet return rate is 80. But in non-Nordic countries, the return rate is lower, but so too are the predictions. And so both the actual and predicted expectations of wallet return are both higher in Nordic countries. So that's the end of my summary for chapter 2, and I hope that offers a lot of food for thought. And in case it's helpful, I'll just quickly give a one-slide summary for the other chapters so you know what else is in the report on these themes of caring and sharing. So in chapter 3 of this year's report, the authors present some data on sharing meals with others. They find that it's strongly associated with life satisfaction, which is on par to the influence of other important predictors of life satisfaction, including higher levels of income and unemployment. They find that people who share more meals with others report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction, positive emotions, and lower levels of negative affect. And this seems to be a consistent finding across ages, genders, countries, cultures, and regions. And they also pair this alongside some deep dive in data taken from the United States with the American Time Use Survey, showing that now roughly 1 in 4 Americans are reporting eating meals alone. And this is an increase of over 50% over the past 20 years. And so while this seems to be kind of a consequential predictor of our happiness, unfortunately, this metric is looking like a decline in actual behavior. Chapter 4 explores how the size and configurations of people's households impact or are associated with their life satisfactions. The authors use some data from both Mexico and Europe and find that a household size of approximately 4 to 5 people predicts the highest levels of happiness. Couples who live with at least one child or couples who live with children and or members of their extended family report especially higher levels of happiness, while people living on their own often experience lower levels of happiness. Although there is also a tipping point such that sometimes very large households can lead to lower levels of happiness, potentially due to economic strain or dissatisfaction. Chapter 5 is looking at social connections and how they're vital for our well-being, and with a particular focus on young adults. The data present measures of social disconnection and how approximately 1 in 5 youth around the world are now reporting that they don't have someone they could count on for social support. This is up from 20 years or so ago, where it was closer, where it was about I think about half that rate. Importantly, many young adults seem to underestimate their peers' own empathy, which leads them to take fewer social risks where they could go out and form these meaningful relationships. However, this is the one chapter where I have one extra slide because I think they did some really fascinating experimental work showing some really neat and engaging interventions can help do what they call bridge this empathy gap. And so the authors are from Stanford and they report on some interventions they've done with their incoming classes of students. And although they find a pretty persistent empathy gap where students underestimate the kindness of their fellow students, through 2 different interventions, these authors were able to help close that gap and help students actually anticipate and appreciate the kindness of their peers, which was not only wonderful in and of itself, but it led these folks to go out and form new connections, which I think helps to get at an additional source of the problem. Finally, chapter 6, not finally, almost finally, shows that in times when countries experience higher levels of pro-social behavior in the form of donations, volunteer work, and helping strangers, there are lower levels of deaths of despair. And so I think this is a really nice deaths of despair, which is often considered death through overdose, drug abuse, alcoholism, and I believe suicide as well. And so I think this chapter is a nice extension on past research, which has looked at how pro-social behavior can contribute to our own well-being and is kind of a striking case for how increasing pro-social behavior might be reliably associated with greater health and happiness and survival for others. Chapter 7 looks at how subjective experiences like life satisfaction and trust impact values and voting behavior. The authors use data from Europe and the United States to look at the decline in happiness and social trust to see how this predicts an increase in political polarization and votes against the system. And it helps try to understand the rise in anti-system votes with people on the right and left voting for different parties. And finally, chapter 8 it provides a deep dive into the numerous ways in which charities can differ, and particularly the authors estimate how much happiness per dollar various charitable enterprises can bring by using this metric of well-bees, which is well-being years. They find that the well-being cost effectiveness of charities varies quite drastically, with some charities having hundreds and hundreds of happiness impacts above and beyond the others. So there's a lot in this year's report. I don't think, I'm sure I didn't do justice to all of these chapters, but hopefully this helps direct you to a chapter that might be up your alley of great interest. And so thank you. Special thanks to all the chapter authors, but especially the chapter 2 team that I got to dive into and present some of their work here, and to all the amazing funders and supporters of this. So let me stop sharing here and then invite John to annotate, correct, extend upon any of that.
You've done a lovely job, Lara. I think I'd rather hear from the rest of the gang as to what their questions are. I might add with that very last one, the charities chapter didn't dig into how the charity works. But if you actually look at that list, you don't need to get it back. But the ones at the very top that produce the highest gains in well-being are ones where it's driven by volunteers and contributed activity and people working together. It's not just something coming from someone else and dropped in. Those rank lower. And so that is a way emphasizes the message at the beginning that being engaged in an activity to produce a better life for those around you and more general others is the key to something that's both sustainable and, of course, good value, because these people who are involved as volunteers in the middle of this process are themselves gaining from that. In the health space, which of course is where Thrive lives, there's a lot of correlative evidence that actually for the people who make the best helpers in terms of for other people are also people who themselves know something about that condition. And they, in fact, do better as advisors and helpers for others than people who have expertise but not experience. And they also gain themselves a lot from that process. So you could see why there's an extra twist in the health space for unlocking the power of co-creation of well-being.
Maybe I'll ask a follow-up question on that, just to pull on that thread a little bit, and linking it to the benefits that come from the caregiver in these pro-social behavior situations. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how that could apply so for example, Dad, with your example of someone who's maybe been a cancer survivor helping someone else who's going through the same cancer they did, and how that can become a more official part of the healthcare system, without offloading responsibilities onto citizens, but really having it more of a collaborative thing between the citizens and the system and the patients.
Well, that's what I said, and you've just said, and it's true. People typically did not pay very much attention to what's going on for the giver. They looked at whether these peer support mechanisms were good for the receivers, and they were. But then when they dug back into it, they found they were even better for the givers than for the receivers. And that's, of course, runs counter to a lot of these caregiver burnout studies that people look at, but they were looking at places, deliberately looking for the negatives. Where are the places where the caregiving has put too much burden on? It's often within family situations without enough support for others, making a general case that caregiving is bad for well-being. It turns out if you look right across the broader spectrum, the reverse is true. That to be in a position where you can help others is wonderful. Obviously, the terms and conditions matter. You can have too much because you don't have any help. The bigger the collaborating group, the greater the extent to which there are other people to call on to help you care, obviously make it better. The lack of evidence on this, and this is something where Thrive really has an open door. I think of networks, sort of connections among people that you have the power to create, where they actually are monitoring their own health. They're being offered the chance to help others in that space. And you're going to have it playing out and being adapted and experimented with in different subpopulations according to where your work takes you. You've got a chance to really improve the evidence base for this, because it's so far still fairly limited. The outside evidence suggests it's really important, but now it's time to start really trying real-world experiments and trials of bringing together these wider collaborative groups fueled by shared knowledge about what's going on in the system, as well as a broader and more open access to other people you can call on and other people you can help. And that there's more attention paid in the healthcare system to people you can call on when things are going well. There are not enough open doors for people to come in and reach out and help others. And what we're emphasizing in this report and throughout the history of the report is that under-measured, under-recognized willingness to help others is in fact a way of both lowering the costs of delivering health care and increasing its benefits, not just for those who come in sick, but for those who come in to help us others and don't get sick.
Thank you. Lara, anything to add to that?
Short answer is I agree, but I think there's one place where I've seen this evidence grow is in advice giving. I realize that's not within the health frame, but there have been some really fascinating experiments done across the United States where high school students or college students have been asked to either receive tutoring or give tutoring to other students. And time after time, the students who are giving tutoring as opposed to receiving it, and they're randomly assigned. So it's not like the gifted students are the ones who, elect to put their hands up and offer assistance to others. But being in a position of providing care and compassion and also guidance to other people has led to greater motivation, has led to higher grades and a number of payoffs. And it's been one thing I've been actually trying to do in my classrooms lately is invite students at the end of the year to give advice to the incoming class. And I think they leave with this new perspective. I think it forces you to kind of adopt a different role. And I think a lot of students really appreciate being in that position to offer assistance where maybe they don't always realize that they had that at their fingertips.
That's a wonderful addition, Lara. There's one more twist again on that. The stuff that Phil Ariopoulos did in Toronto of the same venture, they found that there was this big benefits to being able to give, but the closer the link between the giver and the receiver, in other words, to give this advice face to face within a context where you can both see and appreciate. So the closer the caring connection between the two, the more effective the advice was, and the more happiness that you got for both the giver and the receiver.
That's a nice tie back to those caring connections, right? So when you have that connection and when you can see the impact, I think that's when you feel especially good about it. I should say, though, we've also, confirming the evidence or that I reported here, we've also asked hundreds of incoming students whether they would prefer this kind of peer support and advice or whether they would prefer study tips. And the majority of them say they prefer study tips, but when we give them the two, they feel much happier getting the peer support. So there's a little microcosm of the evidence I presented here. People don't always anticipate how much they will enjoy and appreciate this support, but when it's there, it matters.
That's an exact replica of the wallet evidence, right? People don't realize how much gain they get from these direct helping contacts with other people.
Yeah. And even the Scandinavians are off, at 40% instead of 80%, right? Think how happy they could be.
So absolutely. Another way of putting that is this negativity bias, which everybody has. It's everywhere, even in places where the overall delivery and recipient is higher, it's there. So that's an open door that people in a position like Thrive were able to sort of upgrade the opportunities for and the information about the kindness of others, have a chance to deliver better outcomes in all dimensions, even in the Nordic countries, as you say.
Yeah. So speaking of that, with Menti, thanks everybody who's submitted questions, and keep going with them. We'll be posting them in a second, but there are a number of questions around Finland and Canada's ranking. And so maybe just to bring all of those together, starting with, so in the first World Happiness Report, where I believe Finland was number 9 and Canada was number 6, and now Canada's number 18, Finland's 8 years in a row at number 1. So what's going on there? And then general lessons from Finland and also health-specific lessons from Finland, because they also spend less than we do on healthcare. They're 10%, we're 12% of GDP, and they get better outcomes. So that's a whole bunch of things there. But if you could just weave in whichever elements you'd like, you'll hit a few questions in once there.
Well, there's two things combined here. And of course, when you're talking about rankings, you're wondering who's going up and who's going down. The Canadian-US thing is really an Anglosphere drop driven by well-being among the young, for which the way in which social media are used are a prime candidate for attention because, for example, it hasn't happened in Quebec within Canada the same way it's happened among the rest of Canada. Quebec has not dropped anything like and now the people in La Presse ask and publish the fact that if Quebec were listed as a separate country, it'd be number 8 in the world, while English-speaking Canada would be behind the United States just. So that's telling you that the kind of news and views and perceptions of negativity that are so dominant in the US-centric social media and other media have taken a real toll on happiness. It's probably true, going back to ask where are the Nordic countries in all this, they are all exposed in some sense. It's available to them, but they simply don't participate as much in that accumulated negativity that seems to have happened. Some people say, and we'll get, maybe next year we can do another version and deal with it with more science, because we're going to make the focus of our next year's report on social media and their consequences with many expert chapters from different perspectives. Getting back to health and Finland, I've always noticed that they provide more equally distributed and higher quality healthcare and education than almost any country by any of the measures. And so that automatically increases well-being and makes the whole system more resilient. The cooperative spirit is higher, and that wallet data show you that's true. A Finnish expert this year emphasizing the difference in how negativity is taking root elsewhere and bringing down well-being and making it hard to cooperate, even in areas like healthcare. And people then get too risk averse and they draw in because they don't trust the institutional environment the way they should. He said it was the Finnish election, which was held very recently. When the election was announced, there was a big cheer in the camp of the new prime minister. And where did he go immediately after that? He went to the headquarters of the loser in the election and congratulated and celebrated the other parties. Well, that's the kind of bridging across what otherwise can become ideological and operational divides that's really important. And it's true in each walk of life, but that's just evidence of how they manage to, and it takes deliberate action, right? You have to say, I'm after collaboration and forgiveness and helping, rather than looking for somebody I can blame for my current situation and take it out. So I often describe it as moving beyond the pointing out who might be responsible for a bad situation to moving towards what can people do together to make it better. And broadly speaking, the Nordic countries have been better at that. And they haven't always been that high on the scale, but they're obviously getting positive feedbacks.
Anything more to add to that on the Finland?
No, I'll leave it there. I saw there were lots of questions and we're short on time, so
yes. Okay, great. Kelsey, could you put them back up again just so we can take? Maybe I'll let Lara. You can pick the next one you want to jump into.
I saw one, I don't know where it is on the screen right now, but it was what advice would you give someone who wants to be happy question is
yes.
Is that one I will delightfully take. I think that's a beautiful picture. Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of advice I think the science of well-being can offer, but I think grounding it in the World Happiness Report, and especially in this year's World Happiness Report, is really the happiness that comes from being with and helping other people. So, if you think back to some of those predictors I mentioned, that some of those factors that help explain the variation across countries, we were talking about GDP per capita and healthy life expectancy, and trust in one's government, and all of those are big, important things. But there's little that each of us could perhaps do to change GDP per capita. Some of those things are beyond an individual's control. And so what I often kind of point people towards is investing in those social experiences, the time we have with other people to build and strengthen those social connections so that we have someone to count on in times of need, but hopefully more than one, but also that we go out of our way to help other people. The key measure used to explain those variations across country is financial forms of generosity through donations. But I think those other forms of giving, like helping strangers and volunteering our time, and perhaps other ways that just aren't measured by the World Happiness Report, through informal social support that might come from caretaking, through giving advice, through giving blood, through giving organs, through food sharing, all these ways in which we give some of our resources to other people, I think are some research supported and really enjoyable ways to improve our own well-being.
Great. No, thank you. There's another one there about world events and broader things going on in the world that I think is worth mentioning, given there's so much going on. And if you could specifically talk about Israel as well, because I think that's quite an interesting situation, but also
John, do you
broader.
want to take that question? How did or did global events such as the economic challenges, climate crises, and conflicts influence this year's results? So I know Israel was was certainly a point of interest.
It is worth noting that Israel has always been high. It's never been below 12, and it's been as high as 6 or 7. And they have a lot of common cause. They have come from different countries, but they've all been under threat. I mean, Durkheim 130 years ago showed that the Jewish populations, although they're the most educated, where the suicide rates are higher, they had the least suicide rates. And he said that's because they have subject to an existential threat. So that existential threat that lies in the history of most Israeli citizens is what they have in common. And they have come out of that, despite their internal fighting, with a strong sense of working together to survive. And it doesn't always play out in ways that are good for global survival. And so to be subject to an external threat gives rise to internal collaboration. If it's a natural disaster, then there's nobody to blame, and people work together to repair. Where conditions are good enough, they work together to repair the damage after the earthquake, and they can end up happier after the earthquake than before, because they've realized and used this desire that they didn't previously recognize to help each other, and they see the goodness of others, and it makes them feel good. That cooperation in a difficult time does buoy up happiness within Israel during these periods. To have a devil outside the gate, although it can give you internal cohesion, it can give you unfair and unjust and damaging attitudes towards others. And so that's where wars come from. So you need a broader sense of this caring connection in order to maintain peace at the same time as maintaining internal happiness. And quite clearly, the external damage from an internal cohesion can be very big. You can see this happening if you look at the Canada-US situation at the moment. The actual internal cohesion created by saying we're working together to make America great again, to those from the outside who are quite deliberately being posed as enemies in order to draw together the domestic troops to look after each other and make America great again, clearly are damaging for the overall system, but are being used to create more cohesion domestically. And there has always been a temptation of this evident use of us-them distinctions in order to get the us to do better and to do more, clearly seen from a higher level, are simply bad for world well-being and indeed any reasonable thinking through. And so that emphasizes something we took up right at the end of chapter 2 in this report, that you have to be able to embody forgiveness for the wrongs of others in order to maintain and build that broader collaboration that's needed to achieve cooperation. Individual handbooks for happiness don't give enough importance that the experimental evidence does to the power of cooperation and working to achieve collaborative solutions. Much beats winning in a competitive situation.
Great, thank you. Now I'll give you the choice to. Do you see a question that you like most, or would you like me to direct the next one?
Well, let me take on the Canada one. The steps Canada can specifically take. I think the idea to exploit the consequences of simply following the U.S. and integrating so tightly with the U.S. in both communications and military affairs and in industrial production is clearly been now people's eyes are being opened that may be too expensive and to have been a mistake. It's clearly made people willing to develop more cooperative things at home. It's really important to exploit that in order to make something that's better on a global terms. And so I sometimes put it as, we're not trying to put elbows up to make enemies, we're trying to reach out to friends. And to the extent those friends are within the United States, that's fine. But more importantly, to balance the overall portfolio, you have to be more even around the world. So that means it's been so natural to simply take what's available on your screen and find a product or a process that's run from outside. Our healthcare system has relied in terms of its information providing and its converting to e-records for a whole lot of these things to people who aren't heart and soul in the domestic system. So you have to take advantage of the things that have been overlooked, the Canadian opportunities that are here, in a way that's shrewd, because you can't just play. The US or China can play we're going to ignore the rest of the world, and eventually they'll manage to have something, but they're big enough that it's easier for them to do that. The smaller countries, which of course include the Nordic countries just as much as Canada, they rely on and have to learn to cooperate with other countries and so on. And so Canada in the current, Canadians in the current context ought to be exploiting this current desire to develop a more independent structure and set of institutions, to do it institution by institution. And of course, the space in which Thrive works is absolutely fundamental to that, because we've had a number of ways in which the health system has had too many blockages, if you like. And so the risk aversion that stops people trying new things and opening new doors has to be taken on quite directly. And it's something you see in the platforms in a literal form of all the political parties, but you have to be practical about which doors we had to open and what kinds of cooperation do we have to build. And the time is right to do this using the kind of tools that Thrive has and others don't. And so that's one group of Canadians, the ones that are gathered together today. But I make the same talk when I talk to people who are delivering healthcare as practitioners, or people who are designing cities, or delivering any of these things that can be done better. And looking at not a north-south source of partnerships driven by institutions and closeness, but by a desire to work with like-minded people to develop a robust system of cooperation. Too long and too general, but there it is.
No, no. Well, clearly there's a lot of stuff there that fits with, because at Thrive we're trying to be the Canadian partner to make the whole system more citizen-centric and patient-centric, but it's hard to make those changes at the system level. So we got a couple minutes left. So Kelsey, is there one urgent question we should ask for 30-second responses, or is it okay to move to wrap up comments?
Yeah, I think we can wrap up. I think we have
Okay.
sort of things in groups.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. So maybe just, a minute to each of you to sort of put a bow around, what your thoughts are, particularly on what the people on this call, largely from Thrive Health, where we can really have some leverage to make Canadians happier and healthier.
Lara, you go first.
Okay. I think Thrive has this opportunity to help bring people into the system, to empower them to be more involved and to foster a lot of connections between people helping one another, and kind of helping, I think, bring about many of the connections that can oftentimes feel so far away and so foreign as people are navigating really important healthcare decisions in moments where people might feel especially vulnerable and helpless. And so I think kind of a lot of this research we've been talking about is on a day-to-day basis, but I imagine that when people are making these significant life choices with high stakes, this is especially valuable and consequential. And so I'm hoping that the research in this year's report brings a lot to bear and reinforces some of all the potential, the power of people being willing to help one another, even if we might underestimate that, but also the benefits that come with doing that, that when we go out of our way to help other people, either through work or through our everyday lives and supporting them through these important healthcare decisions and the process, there's a lot to be gained emotionally through their health and happiness.
I think the magic that Thrive has the power to do is to allow individuals to be more connected with each other and with the system. And the magic sauce is probably the individuals opting in. And that's probably the only way of dealing with all the otherwise limiting risk averting privacy considerations and so on that have made it infinitely hard to develop a better record sharing and common base that you really need if you're to collaborate across silos and indeed across the country. And so to harness this fact that nobody's going to be involved who doesn't want to be involved, doesn't provide universal coverage to anybody, but the nature of our research is you'll be surprised, and especially the skeptics will be surprised at the extent to which people really are willing to have their eyes scanned and their record shared in order to help them help others and to allow the system to be more effective. And that's particularly important in these times.
Absolutely. Well, for our surgical solutions, we have over 95% of people who say I'm in. And so it often surprises people. Well, thank you both so much once again for your tireless efforts to put out yet another amazing World Happiness Report, and for sharing your time and insights with us. And if you're up for it, we'd like to schedule you for next year. But thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure, and thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thank you, and keep up your good work, all you Thrivers.